So as Naomi explained, I will be talking a bit about my experience with residencies, and I will have also some questions for Amparo, who is also very interested in this topic. And at the end, I will present some of the results of the research. I was really surprised when I realized spaces like the Jan van Eyck existed, because I believe they are offering these amazing conditions to artists, and and there is so much potential for ideas and for experiments to arise in an environment like this. For me, a residency is a pressure-free time and space in a collaborative environment where support is a key word. So my first question to you is, and of course it has to do with time, how do you perceive time while you are in residency, and did the perception of time change for you according to different experiences and spaces?
Yeah, thank you, Margarida. Maybe I start just, I didn't share my word, and the word that came to me or that I bring is reciprocity. That maybe then in another moment we can go more there. But maybe in relation to your question, you also asked me before about this displacement between South America and Europe. I came from Argentina, so maybe I will go to this question from there.
Yeah.
Because I think that for me something that was very interesting coming from Argentina, the relation with residencies as a way of, as a mode of creation and production that is maybe, I don't know, well, some here, there is other people from South America that maybe can, then we can also go more there. And I don't know how it is in other contexts outside Western Europe, but at least in South America, to work in residency is something very extraordinary. The way in which we used to create or have process of creation in general are more in long term. So it's not very present, this idea of the intensive time and in another context. That is some of the characteristics of residencies. So for me, this coming from a place where we have a more extensive process and suddenly being in Europe where artists are more used to create like in very concentrated moments and in different contexts was something that catch my attention. And I started to think how this idea of residency was bringing this concept of the intensity, that is a very particular kind of relation with time that has to do with also concentration. And there is implicit the idea of productivity, like to use the time in a way that is productive. And anyway, it was now very interesting to hear the words that you were bringing that for me were not going in that direction, but I could, it's something that has been very present for me in thinking about residencies, in which way we can think of residencies beyond the idea of intensive, or at least other than intensive use of time. And maybe it has to do also with something that is, that maybe is personal, that has to do with the experience during COVID times. This kind of disacceleration that we experienced that, at least for me, was the opportunity to start to pay attention to things that were there close to me and close to my process, that I realized that in this mode of hyper concentration and acceleration was not possible to pay attention. So maybe the first the question that I bring here to this conversation is about this, about how we can think in this way of creating, that is through residencies, beyond intensive moods, mood or or ways. And then there is another word that for me has to do maybe not directly with time, but more with this displacement that is implicit in residency. And maybe in relation to that, I will also bring more questions that answers, but that has to do with how we relate with this question about displacement in moments in which displacements also has consequences in ecology. How we can relate with this in a way that contemplate the asymmetries and the way that historically the privilege of moving and migrate has been distributed. So what I am bringing here is just maybe, problems, but I think is in moments where to move, to take airplanes is a thing, and we cannot pay attention to that. I think it's also important, especially maybe because I came from a very far place. How we can keep giving complexity to this in a way that the consequences don't fall only in those who have been historically vulnerable or with no privileges about this possibility of moving. So these two, displacement and ecology, and these other than intensive ways of being in residency, maybe are the two first things that I would like to bring to our conversation today.
So now I'm going to quickly present the results of the research I undertook last year. The first phase was a mapping. So I wanted to create a long list, as Naomi said, of 86. Well, I did not want to create 86, but it became 86 residency spaces. And I used two information platforms about residencies, the Trans Artist database and the Res Artist database. I've also talked with lots of people, with artists, with residency facilitators, also with my team, with my colleagues. So I collected different residency spaces through all these resources to make my 86 list. And what I found out by analyzing these databases was that according to the Trans Artist database, only 4% of the spaces offer a partial stipend. So that's a really, really small number in 1,400 residency spaces. And according to the Res Artist database, it is possible to research by country, by art practice. So that's what I did. And I found out that according to this database, the spaces available in there are no paid artistic residencies focused on performing artists in the first 5 countries where Espaço Agora is going to be located. And more than that, almost 70% of the residency spaces even require artists to pay fees, and sometimes these fees are quite high. I also brought this quote from the book I was talking before that I find really interesting because, well, Bojana Paneska is saying that she's talking about the trans artist database, and she's saying that both in 2016 and 2017, there were about 200 new submissions for residences to be added, but that only around half of these spaces were added, because half of the submissions do not meet the criteria. They do offer time and space, as we know, it's very important. But as she says, they lean more towards the experience of renting a room without any other support or the experience of being hosted. Quite often, as she says, the fee artists have to pay is very high while they are not getting so much in return. So here we see that it's not just about offering time and space, but what kind of time and space is offered and what kind of support is offered. In the following phase, I made a short list. Out of these 86 I made a short list of 20 of the most interesting spaces. And I compared these 20 spaces with Espaço Agora main characteristics, the main characteristics of the residencies. And I found out that no single space had the same 11 characteristics. As we will see, I will explain to you what are these characteristics. And in the report I wrote, I went a bit more in depth. Today we didn't have time for me to in depth, but I also identified points of relevance and inspiring practices. Because as Naomi said, we don't want to replace the models that exist. We want to also learn from the models that exist. The last phase, I focus on interviewing people, both residency facilitators, but also some artists from our community. And in terms of what I found out from the residencies themselves, was that in terms of the criteria for choosing residencies, this was related to professionality and excellence most of the times, although this is highly subjective. And some residencies also wanted artists to be willing to live in and as a community. So the criteria also changes according to space. Funding models, some spaces had a mixed economy of publicly funded programs. A lot of programs, artists are paying the costs most of the times. And one exception, which was l'asilo in Italy, where almost no money is used at all. Lastly, from of the artists, the positive aspects of the residency experiences were usually related to having a stipend and a production budget, having time, flexibility, almost no pressure or no pressure at all, having technical support, having a good residency environment with staff and with artists, residency staff being well trained, having a good and stable network, and having sources of inspiration. In terms of the aspects to improve, this was related to studio restrictions, technical limitations, staff staying too long or staff that is not well trained, poor archive, online archive, lack of transparency, for example, in the way artists are chosen or in the way decisions are made. Housing, many people said that it could be better, but it was really not the most important of the things, was always the least important. And also power structures. So who chooses the residencies and why they choose the residencies, so that the people don't have these questions like, why am I here? And why not another person? So this is all. Thank you for your attention, and let's see the questions.
The first question is about what does it mean to do a residency post-pandemic? Are there now different issues that arise, particularly around things like mobility and digital, being able to travel, be in a place for a period of time? And the second question for groups 2 and 4 is about how you would approach inhabiting the territory that you will be in, whether it's your own local territory or if you might travel to one of the other spaces and be there for an extended period of time.
I was actually in residence in Hong Kong during COVID, and it was a very, very strange experience because I arrived in Hong Kong in the beginning of February, knowing that I was going to be there for 3 months and waiting for the school to open, and it never did. It didn't open until June. My residency was extended, but I ended up, although I had access to the studios, I ended up being all alone in a big, big building and just kind of teaching Zoom classes with my students. So yes, has my perception of residences changed following the pandemic? I think because we were so unprepared for what was coming. You know, we had the tools such as Zoom and, you know, ways of using it, but creatively, I was not prepared to be in a digital residency, in a purely digital residency. So, you know, I feel that, yes, now knowing, if I was to go back to that residency, knowing that I was not going to meet my students for so long, I would have prepared completely differently. I think the problem then was that we were always going to open the next week and we're always planning for return to the studio. Whereas nowadays, I think for me, you really having to plan for both and see the opportunities in both, which is something I started to do post that residency, having come back to the UK. So that's my conclusion now, knowing that we have to live with COVID, is that you have to come prepared to deliver an in-person residency, as well as consider what your program might look like if you're not going to be able to connect with people directly with your collaborators. And I think in that sense, personally, I've made a huge strides. And my other point, Katharina, is also about seeing the opportunity in the digital connection that we have globally now.
From the start of the pandemic, I knew that this will be long. So I started a project with international project with many artists from all over the world. There is 25 people included. It's informal, it's nothing formal. We started doing workshops online over Zoom, and also doing in the pairs, which was in one way not possible, but then people started developing their own performances and just editing the videos. So then we post online and show the audience our work, and we are doing that for a year every day. So it's endlessly performing art. So we started from the last April, and this April will be the end of this project, and I hope we will continue. And there is people from America, Canada, from Iran, and from Turkey, and from many countries. And we find that this was really positive to connect with from different kinds of cultures, you know, especially for example, the Iran is forbidding women to dance and perform publicly. So that this was the only platform where they could actually do it, and had the support from the people from other countries and from all over the world. And it was really positive. And this, I hope this year, if nothing change, we will gather physically in July and invite other performance artists to join us and just meet others and do the workshops and things. This looks like a residence. It's not a residence, just a project, but it's an idea in that way. So it was very positive, but in other hand, it was a little bit depressive, especially for me, because we were always online, and this is a little bit pain in the ass, sorry again for my language, but it's really difficult to sit in front of the computer, have no physical contact with the physical person, you know. And what I miss more physical physical cooperation, physical communication, better than in this platform, this Zoom platform.
I can, what I concluded, that really we have to be flexible to change, really to be ready to change our ideas completely and to find solutions, how not to stop gathering and working, not just to go to these online things. And yeah, that's about.
Yeah, I think you touched on something important that we, well, at least I forgot about when we talk about residencies post-COVID, because it's not just about digital, is it? You've mentioned the outdoor, which had really been kind of rediscovered, at least here in the UK. A friend of mine is a director of this kind of organization that's an umbrella organization for all the outdoor arts. And they were, you know, booming post-pandemic, because that was the one thing that we are allowed to you know, share in a public space. So there's that I think is quite valuable, actually.
If I'm going to find a positive in the idea of the residency, for me as an artist, and I'm going to imagine a post-pandemic world, one of the tremendous positives that might be there is kind of stillness, the kind of idea that although you may have to travel to the residency place if you're able, and it may be more difficult for some people than others, once you're there, you have you've got an opportunity to be still and in a place if you can get to that place, which for me as an artist who does a lot of touring and development, you know, because I, you know, quite often make but also perform, the idea that there might be a space in a post-pandemic world that requires travel but then requires stillness, you know, could be a positive, depending on, as you say, how these, you know, fluid and urgent situations kind of play out at the moment. Yeah. Perhaps there's also a, you know, one of the ways we can be aware of that post-pandemic situation, whatever that means, is to facilitate people who can't travel to, you know, to think about what could be an element of a residency for someone who travels, to include a collaborator who can't, even if it's just allowing them access to the work or having discussions with them wherever they are.
How to find this hybrid methodologies in which it is still possible to have these collaborations with the people who can travel.
It makes me think of residencies where you don't actually leave your home, whether this is also something to think about for Espacio Agora, whether people could apply to create a residency that they can structure in their own space if it's not possible to travel. I've not been able to do this, but there are some examples. I think I know this because there was something aimed at mothers, and you know, to not be able to do any work, but you want to keep going. So there was like support and financial support, and just a way to structure your creative process in dialogue, in collaboration, whatever you needed. So, but I think that this is what I feel from Espacio Agora, where the opportunity is that the artists can come up with all these ways to engage.
I was thinking how to, in these collaborations at distance, how could we can think about remote collaboration not necessarily digital.
Definitely a new language. I think this post-COVID era requests new language among artists, among you know, art residencies and everything. And that's what we are doing right now, I guess.
Another word that came to my mind was like haven, or like somewhere to rest for a bit, you know, in this time. Like, I wonder how important that aspect of a or potential of the residency is to sort of feel a little bit of a temporary anchor, and to have that sort of support, whatever that might look like, have access to that kind of support that can help in this time of like extreme uncertainty, anxiety.
For me, it is incredibly important that you move, the real presence, that you can really go someplace and feel, feel the air. The air is not the same in Belgrade, in New Zealand, in Buenos Aires. It's absolutely not the same. And the air and the smells we cannot transmit through the screens. The Zoom is a fine thing, but it's just a tool. And also, meeting other person, in a performance art, you have to feel the person before you.
I think in the concept of Espacio Agora, as I understand it, it's precisely about that. For some artists, about that experience of moving, about the different air. All these things are incredibly important to me. I like to go to places. If I'm commissioned to write a play for a theatre in this country, you never mind outside of the UK, I ask them to provide me with a place in that theatre so I can go to them and I can write in their theatre, because I find that idea of presence so necessary.
Let's sort of go around the groups and then have some reflections, and we're going to leave the Jamboards open so you can sort of keep putting things into them. And then we can sort of continue that conversation with all of you, with some of you at other moments.
We talked about the balance of working locally, nationally, and globally. So we talked about how the pandemic means that we're having to sort of look for opportunities closer to home, that the opportunities, of traveling abroad and creating something with other artists or other communities have become more sparse, but how by looking around kind of the communities that we know, some new doors might open that we previously did not see. However, of course, there's also danger of kind of just becoming our own echo chambers, and the worry about lack of sort of creative exchange of ideas on a more universal scale.
Yeah, so we were talking about inhabiting territory. We talked a lot about walking and guided walking, and the kind of awareness and walking and getting to know a locale that would be your obvious starting point. We talked about the spaces being pre-curated. So if you're going on a residency as an artist, if you're not a local artist, then what the levels of preparation are. And we were talking about that needed to happen right at the beginning when the space was set up, but also that the faculty would have local knowledge and also guidance through a residency. And lastly, we talked about the difference between kind of rather romantic alpine retreats as a model for residency, and why Espacio Agora, by going into the city, was making that was fundamental to the kind of residencies that would then take place, because if you're listening and looking properly, obviously one becomes aware of all kinds of conflicts and social conflicts. So we were looking at it from point of view internally within the space, but also out of it, and how the transfer between the two and between the sort of experimental, playful layer and the more activated layer.
We were talking about this idea box ticking and art making. So we were saying that very often residencies request a specific topic. For example, they say we are looking for projects at a beginning phase about environmental sustainability or ecology or etc. And we were saying that it feels like this topic, the structures, they push the artists to bend their practices towards areas of interest that they wouldn't necessarily be interested in. And we were saying that some of us, because of the financial struggle or the obstacles that we have to face as freelance artists, very often we actually go off chart because of that, and because we need the opportunity. And we were wondering, what if there could be an option where the actual residency proposes to the artist and asks them what is it that they need, what are they passionate about, and how can we help you design and tailor and facilitate your needs. And to that, it was strictly connected to this idea of where is the money coming from? Because where the money is coming from is what very often also directs the topics that are being faced in a residency. And so we were also wondering, how is it that Espacio Agora would be looking into defying this structure, that very often is in place, and this obviously goes down to where the money is coming from, obviously. And we were also discussing the fact that they said, like, how do we make a space influence the practice of the residency itself? Like, how do we make the territory be relevant for the artist? And one of the last considerations that we had that we thought it was pretty crucial, it was that in the end, it is down to the sensitivity and the willingness of the artist to connect, because and this I put forward an example. I said I work in a refugee center that has a structure that supports arts and culture, and in exchange the community of refugees gets the space and is able to be alive. And very often we offer support to artists, and very often artists just simply ignore the fact that they are in a refugee center.
Amparo, we kicked off with your perspectives on residency. It'd be nice to know what you think now, or if anything has come to you.
Yeah, I was bringing this question of reciprocity, that actually the way in which I have been trying to think of these words is not just in terms of an exchange, like a symmetrical exchange of giving and receiving, for example, but more as a condition of every gesture we do. Maybe in the choreographic or in dance, this idea of touch, for example, as a gesture, that always when we are touching, we are also being touched. This ambivalence is for me a reciprocal, is a condition of reciprocity. But this also happens in other gestures, as for example, to listen, that we used to think more as a passive gesture. And we can also see how the way we listen, and even today in this conversation, the way we were listening was affecting what was said. So it's also a very active gesture. And this condition of mutual transformation is what I call reciprocity. And in relation to residency, for me, it brings the question of all these series of affectations in which we are involved when we are in a residency, which are the conditions that we create for let our process to be affected for this environment where we are, but also in which way we are affecting this environment, which conditions we are creating for this knowledge that we are creating. And I say knowledge as art, also like how is distributed, which are the conditions for this, what we propose in an environment or in a context then to continue growing up. So yeah, I think that this, for me, inhabiting is a very nice verb gesture to think about the reciprocity and to think about how we can think residencies, like even if we are temporarily in a context, how we can imagine this as a way of inhabiting a place.